Hi, welcome everyone. This is a webinar and my name's John Sanders and I'm joined by Daniel Salcedo. We're both co-leads of the AMEE Technology Enhanced Learning Committee, and the focus of today's webinar is how to submit a successful AMEE TEL Committee Innovation Grant. I'm going to give a short presentation about the background to begin with. Then that's going to be followed by Daniel, who is going to be looking at a successful grant from our perspective. How do we actually mark it? And then there's going to be ample opportunity for questions and answers. So we'll start now. Thank you. So before applying for anything, I think it is really important to be clear about the purpose of the award. So the purpose of the award is to stimulate the development of innovative approaches for the use of technology to enhance teaching and learning in health professions education. So number one, this is about development of an innovative approach. Innovation is creating something which is different, something which is new, something which is different. It needs to use technology, and it needs to have a very clear focus on teaching and learning. So we're not particularly interested in applications which I would call medical informatics. So medical informatics are aspects such as developing a health record system, unless it has got a specific focus on teaching and learning. And finally, it's in health professions education. And we look at that very, very wide. And as colleagues know, who are members of AMEE, we're a very, very broad organisation in our membership. So veterinary, dental, nursing, any other health care profession is included. So, number one, is it an innovation? What we will be asking for is, what is your educational challenge? Why are you actually doing this innovation? We want a justification of why you are doing it. We want a very clear description of the innovation that you want to develop. And we want to know why you consider that your proposed innovation is novel and innovative. Now, for innovation, it could be use of an existing technology. So, for example, it could be use of podcasting. I mean, it's already in existence, but could it be used in a slightly different way? Also, it could be the use of an existing TEL approach to a new context, such as in a low resource area. We haven't provided a whole list because that's why we want the Innovation Award. We want to try and stimulate medical educators to respond to the educational challenges that they face with an innovative approach. Some of you may have had the opportunity to attend the various hackathons that we have run at the AMEE conferences or pre-conference. And I've always been impressed by the creativity and the innovation capacity of individuals who are there. Often it's not one particular individual, it's often a team of people. So number one, is it an innovation? I think we need to consider as well that the funding is limited. It's £1,000 and it needs to be spent over a realistic time period, which we think is about 12 months. What you can't fund is the purchase of specific items of equipment unless it is essential and fully justified. So, for example, buying a laptop or a PC for that £1,000 would not be thought to be an appropriate piece of equipment unless there were major difficulties with obtaining that equipment. Salary or honoraria for the applicant is not included. My personal experience of writing funding bids, particularly internal ones where there is a small amount of money, is that the majority of the funding costs are actually for my time or for a researcher. So we do feel it is a realistic amount of money. We also don't include publication fees. Many universities have free access. And for example, medical teacher at the moment does not have an article processing charge unless you want to have green access. And also we don't fund medical writers to present any publication. So what do you want to do? And we want a very, very clear description. What's the focus? What is the topic? What you want to do? What's going to be the target audience for your innovation? Who are the learners? Is there going to be any content? What is the instructional design? What is the technology? And where is it going to be done? The context. Because effective use of technology for teaching and learning requires careful alignment for all of these factors. And if these various factors are not in alignment, it is unlikely that the technology enhanced learning intervention will be successful. So how are you actually going to do it? What is the development process? And for me, the development process is about how you're going to design it and how you're going to implement it and put it into action. So important aspects are, who are you going to involve in this process? And we're interested in the skills mix and experience. So for example, if you're going to be creating a new website, do you actually have the skills to develop it? If not, do you have the support of a learning technologist or somebody else who's got that skills mix? And do they have sufficient experience to show that it can be achieved successfully? We also need to know the resources that you are requesting, but also whether you need aspects from your own institution, especially the finance and the time. Often people are extremely grand in their ideas, and it would require an enormous amount of time to achieve something which they have this intention to develop. So it needs to be realistic. And also whether there are any additional costs, such as licensing fees or copyright fees. Also, we need to think about a realistic time frame. And again, people are often hugely optimistic that they can achieve something in a relatively short period of time, particularly if it needs to be developed in an iterative process. And also it's important to do some form of risk assessment and think about the hurdles on the journey to the design and implementation, and also how they could be overcome. And I think this is a really important aspect, because again, it's showing that you have thought this process through, because we want it to be successful if we award it. And I'm sure people who are applying also want it to be successful, but we need to be realistic. So the design process, how are you going to design it? We know that co-design, working with the users, is absolutely essential. This is usually an iterative process, testing its usability. What do people think of it? Can they easily use it? And there is some research to suggest that something like 80% of usability problems can be identified with only 6 people. So you don't need to be looking at large numbers of people. For example, if you make a cup or a jug and it hasn't got a stable bottom, when you put fluid into it, you don't need to test it out very much to show that it's not a good design. And that is the idea of this usability testing and iterative process. Also think about the multidisciplinary team, especially the role of a learning technologist. Do you actually have, as an applicant, the expertise to do any technical developments, even if it's just very fine-tuning? And the other aspect is that you may have the perfect design, but what about implementation? And importantly, do you have the support of your institution? It is no value creating something which is impossible to implement in the organization. We also want some form of evaluation of your innovation. Does it work or not? And what will be your basic questions? Is it useful to the intended audience? These are the products that you will be producing. But also we are interested in whether you're going to evaluate the ease of use, the processes. And this is because transferred to another context, individuals require an understanding of not whether it does work, but why it works and what some of the difficulties are likely to be. And we'd also like a rough idea about how you will use it. And again, this is about being realistic with the resources that you have and the time frame. People often are quite grand wanting to do large randomized controlled trials, things like that. We're not looking for that. What we're looking for are practical approaches to evaluation. Also, if you have spent the time developing it, how are you going to ensure that other people hear about it? So what's going to be your dissemination strategy? Obviously, if you're going to embed it locally, how are you going to do that? But also, have you had any thoughts about national and international? So we are going to be launching a show and tell site through the Technology Enhanced Learning Committee. There's the AMEE conference each year, and also the possibility of publications. So I hope that you found that interesting. And I'm going to go over to Daniel now, who's going to give the next short presentation, and then we are open for questions and answers. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, John, for introducing the grant for us. And my name is Daniel. Today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what makes a successful grant proposal. And what I would like to do is to share with you some of the things that we look at from the point of view of reviewers of grants. One of the things to keep in mind is that this is not a very large grant, but it serves a very important purpose. For instance, having a grant from an international institution is something that can be very useful for your CV. Being able to run a small pilot project can be very useful for seeking larger funding in the future. So again, this is an opportunity to kind of get involved and be able to run a project or a small project that will lead you into bigger things. So we are very much looking forward to hearing your ideas for innovation, what kind of things you want to see happening in medical education in the future, health professions education in the future, right? It's a great opportunity to test some of those ideas that you might have already, or things that you've just barely been able to implement at a very kind of not very controlled way, and that you would like to do this a little bit more rigorously. So today I'm going to be sharing a couple of tips and ideas that you can use in order to help you go through that submission process. So the first thing, let's take a look about the feasibility part. So regarding feasibility, some of the questions that we ask ourselves when looking at proposals are, for instance, one, is the project well developed, right? Does the project make sense? Does there some fundamental principle that sustains this project, right? For example, are there educational frameworks that are going to be explaining why the technology is doing what we want it to do? So again, we want to see if the project is well developed. The second thing is, and John mentioned this earlier, is to see if the project can really be completed within the proposed time. Remember that a project needs to go through many, many stages, for example, to get institutional research board approval and all that. So all of these things need to be accounted for when you are planning the proposed timeline for your project. So think a little bit about what other things need to happen besides just conducting the research itself or gathering the data itself. And then finally, was budgeting. So with budgeting, we need to be very honest. This is not a very large grant, but again, can you do something within the budget that you do have, right? What can be done within a realistic amount of money that you're going to be using for the project. So again, feasibility is one of the first things that we're going to be looking for. The second thing is, again, potential for success. Obviously, when we provide a grant, our hope is that the projects will be successful and they're projects that can be showcased and shared with the greater community of AMEE. So we are kind of hoping to be able to do that. Now, the first question that, do the researchers have experience with this type of project before? For example, if you've been doing only biochemical research and suddenly want to do medical education research, well, we know that it's very different, right? So it would be good for us to see if some of the researchers have experience in either technology-based research or educational research. The second thing is your team composition, right? So usually a research project is a group of people collaborating, and we want to make sure that you have enough skills to do that. For example, if you're going to be, using video for your project, then we would like to know if somebody there knows how to manage video and edit video. Right? So we want to know that there's a complete skill set to carry this project forward. And then finally, if there are specialized skills that are not available in your team, so how are these going to be acquired, or how are you going to find the people you need to make this happen? So these are some of these success potential features that we're looking at. The next element that we look at is sustainability. So, is this a sustainable innovation? Is this going to be embedded inside your local program? Right? How are you going to share this information? We would also like to know if there's any additional local funding that you have access to. For example, in some cases, you can apply for a grant from your institution together with the grant that we're providing in order to be able to do a larger project. So, again, ideas of how we can identify additional local funding to help you support the project, right? And again, other local forms of support. For example, if your university or your medical school has a center that can support you, for example, an IT specialist center or a video specialist center that can support your project, then these things help us understand that the project is sustainable. Conflict of interest are a very important point here, and this is something that needs to be considered very carefully. The first thing is, one, is there a clear institutional research approval process? Remember that when you apply for these grants, it's really important to take into consideration that you will have to get approval in order to conduct a research. I see a question on the chat from Fatma that says, should we obtain the institutional research approval before applying to the grant? So this depends on your institution as well. So for example, if I think you need to contact the IRB at your institution to find out how this is going to work, but we do need to conduct it before you start the research. The other part is, for example, if you're working with a service provider or a company, we need to understand what is the commercial interest or what is the commercial relationship with that company. The reason for this is because obviously these grants are not meant to be funding for-profit product development. So for example, if this is going to be used to pay a company to do something, and that company is then going to sell the service to other people, that wouldn't really fit the purpose of a grant, right? In that case, maybe the company should be funding their own development. So again, we want to know what is the commercial relationship if you have any commercial partners. Also, for example, if this is going to be a for-profit product, or is this going to be something that is going to be shared freely? So we need to get all this information from you in order for us to understand what you're trying to do. Other big part is risk assessment. So as we are developing the research project, we need to think about what potential risks could this project have. For example, right now with COVID, anything that gathers a large amount of people in the room will carry certain potential risks that need to be considered. Right now, apparently the pandemic seems to be getting a bit better, but again, we don't know what's going to happen. So we need to plan ahead for these kind of issues. So, for example, is there any potential risk for the researchers or for the learners or the patients? For example, if you're going to be filming surgeries, one thing we would like to know is that, that is not going to interfere with the patient's care. So again, it's really important to think about risks that you're introducing by implementing new technologies. Other very important thing is, for example, confidentiality risks. Right? If you're going to be using learner data or patient data in an online environment, you need to make sure that that is safe as well. So again, I invite you to look into the potential risks of the project you're developing and thinking about how this is going to affect what you're doing, and maybe consider some measures that you could take in order to avoid that. The relevance for the field. So again, we definitely want a project that is looking to advance health professions education, right? And again, as John was mentioning, what is the innovation value? Like, what is this going to change? Because if simply what I'm doing is taking a well-known existing piece of technology and introducing it to my institution, well, the innovation value might be less than maybe finding a new way to do things or introducing something that has not been done before. So again, think about how innovative is this project, right? Is it really changing something? Are we all learning something new from it? Other important aspect that we need to look at is potential benefits. So how is this going to benefit? How is this going to benefit, for example, your institution locally? Is doing this kind of project going to improve medical education locally for you? How is this going to benefit other institutions around the world? Maybe what you're developing could be implemented in other places, right? So again, the idea is to kind of share things that you're learning from this project with other people, and we would like to see that considered within your planning. Regarding the funding, again, we want to know about how the funds will be used, not fines, funds. We want to find out how the funds are actually going to be used. Again, for example, it's not about paying a research assistant or buying a new computer, but it's really kind of using the funds in a way that it will be conducive to doing good research. If the project is co-funded, for example, if you have another funding source for your project, let's say your local institution or your local government, then we would like to know how funds are going to be used and how the expenses are going to be distributed. So really important to include a good description of how these funds are going to be used. Again, the other thing is is it realistic, right? Because if you're planning to buy some very expensive machinery, it was a small grant, then it doesn't seem like it's going to work out. So again, we want to know that it's a realistic use of the money. Remember, this is a small grant, and our objective is to be funding small pilots, not very large implementations of technology in a curriculum or something that complex. So it's mostly focused on smaller projects that then can provide you data to seek larger grants. And then finally, is there any potential conflicts of interest with the funding? Like, is there any issue that you need to consider within the funding? For example, we know institutions sometimes take a percentage of grants as a management fee, right? So we need to know all that information beforehand. And that kind of concludes what I want to share with you. I do want to remind you that we have our awesome conference this year in lovely Lyon, France. So please do not forget to register. Also, all the projects that you do within this fund, we hope that will become part of our conference in the year following your grant application. So we are looking forward to having presentations from these projects that come from this grant over here. So I guess in general, that's what I wanted to share so far. And I would perhaps like to now turn it over to you. And John and I will do our best to answer some of your questions, or if there's something that was not very clear in the presentation, we would definitely like to clarify and to kind of help you, because at the end, what we would like to see from this is successful new innovations that help us, lead the way into transformation of health professions education through technology. So if you do have any questions, we would love to hear them. If maybe we can share them in the chat, or we can let us know what your questions are, so we can start answering some of these. We'll wait a few minutes so you have time to type. You can write it. I think it's easier for this if we type it, and then we will do our best to answer it. Thanks for clarifying, Fatma.
I mean, both myself and Daniel realise the amount of hard work that goes into putting a grant proposal forward. I mean, both of us have obviously got experience writing grants, and a very large amount of time goes into it, not just the person presenting the grant, but everybody else who has to sign it off and has the discussions. And we want it to be successful, and we sincerely hope that you found it useful. But if there are questions, right? Fatma said, sometimes a project is a method, not a tool. Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, your project doesn't need to be a specific piece of equipment. I mean, this could be a new way of doing things. What we're looking for mostly is innovation, right? And innovation with a technological component to it.
It doesn't have to be necessary. I mean, for example, it could be the development of a flipped classroom approach to teaching that is specific to a particular context. So you may have a particular difficulty with trying to implement a flipped classroom, and that might be related to the current technology. The main thing is that what we will be looking for is how developing that approach and the evaluation would help others in a different context. Because we all realize that people work in different contexts with different amounts of resources, different learner preferences, different faculty structures. And the initial justification of that, plus how are you going to evaluate it and disseminate it to others, so it is your experiences in one context is highly relevant to someone else, that is a good innovation approach.
Yeah, we have a really good question on the chat, John.
Yes.
It says, the spending part of the grant on something like a subscription to a digital format, to a digital platform that will be used in a different way, like Zoom, for example, does it count? I think it does. I mean, if you're going to use Zoom for an innovative purpose that matches the project that you're trying to do, that's great. But we need to make sure that that is the main purpose of that subscription, right? Because if we're going to be using Zoom for many other purposes, but we might use it just once or twice for the project, then in that case, maybe it wouldn't be acceptable to have that as an expense. So as long as this plays a key role in your project and has and because it's absolutely necessary to conduct this project, then I think it does definitely count as something that could be covered.
Yeah, but also the cost of something like a year's subscription for Zoom is relatively small. You know, it may be what, $150, $200, so you know, £150. So it is a relatively small amount of money.
Yeah. The other thing I'd like to mention briefly is that when you're doing this kind of small grant projects, it's really important to try to use some of the resources that are already available. For example, if most of your students have smartphones, then smartphones become a very attractive platform to run these kind of small projects. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. The idea is to try something new and gather data from this to see how it works and what should be done differently if we want to implement this in a larger scale. Let's see, here we have a question. What are the offered grant amounts? So the offered grant amount is £1,000.
Yeah.
Then we have another question over here. Could the grant be put towards submitting for an Aspire TEL Area of Excellence Award?
My personal view is no, because if you look, I don't know if people have seen the Aspire TEL Area of Excellence Award. If you look at the criteria for that, I haven't got the details immediately in front of me, but since I lead the Aspire panel for the TEL area, it's quite broad. It's an institutional approach that we're looking for. How does the institution actually excel in the use of technology enhanced learning? So it needs descriptors of how it has shown that it has gone through an appropriate process to the development, implementation, evaluation of several interventions. Now, an intervention from this particular award that we're talking about, the innovation grant, could be used as part of that evidence, but it requires more than one. So I'm not sure if that answers Charlotte's question, but there is a cost at the moment. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what it is for the Aspire TEL award, but it couldn't be used towards that, to pay for that.
Okay, any other questions or comments or other things that you would like to bring up? We're very happy to hear from you. John, so here we have another question. It says, yeah, can the funds be used for the application to the award?
If you mean the time spent, I mean, most of the, if it's about applying for the award, the question is what costs are likely to be. Sorry, I think we just need to put a little bit of clarification here. If it's the application, so the Aspire, yeah. If it's about the Aspire, the money, the TEL Innovation Grant cannot be used for the application Aspire fee, for that fee. That's one thing, but also the money can't be used for the development of the grant, the TEL Innovation Grant.
Hopefully, with these projects, what we want to see is the implementation of a technology in which you're going to do something, and you will gather data from this action that you took. So ideally, for example, applying for an Aspire award, well, I mean, that's not really an innovation, right? You're applying for an award based on what you're doing at your institution, but you're not really innovating. So we would like to see this funding to be applied towards doing something new, to develop something that has not been done before at your institution, or something that has not been done before globally. So just the idea is to produce something new, to have an innovation from this grant itself.
Yeah. And as I said before, the Aspire Awards are designed to look at institutional excellence in that area of technology enhanced learning. And we know that successful technology enhanced learning, it requires the evidence to show that you've gone through a process of how you've designed it, taking all those various factors, which I've said, which need to be carefully aligned. So how was that done? How was it iteratively developed and co-creation? Because we know that it's more likely to be used. And then what we need to do is to look at the evaluation and the quality improvement process linked to that. So we're looking at how there is excellence, demonstrable excellence in that process. But if you did have and were successful in a TEL innovation grant, that the development and implementation and evaluation of that grant could be used as part of the evidence for an Aspire award, but there are other factors required for it as well.
Let's see. So we have another question that says, if an innovation is already piloted and published, can we apply for a fund to extend searching its impact?
Right. All innovations are likely to be in one small context only. So, for example, there could be the development of some virtual reality platform, and it could be open software, and it could be relatively easy to use it in another context. So in one context, it could be a high resource setting, and it might be used in surgery, say for surgical training, this virtual reality application. And you think, well, it'd be great to use it in a lower resource setting, say for interprofessional education with doctors and nurses, or doctors, medical students and nursing students. Now the platform, the virtual reality platform, could be open access and free. And that could be then used in another context. So I think that would be an innovation. And again, it's a teaching method. Yes, it could be, provided that it uses technology. I mean, do you have a particular thought in mind, please, of a particular teaching method using technology? If you're happy to share that, please.
Maybe while we get a reply, also I wanted to just quickly mention that, like, this is a really good opportunity to learn how to apply for grants. So for example, we have junior researchers in your institution that have never gone through the process of grant applications. Then this is a really good opportunity to learn how to do that, right? It's so again, I would encourage you to seek the junior faculty in your institution and see if they would be interested in applying for this, and go through the whole process of trying to develop a project and explaining clearly, doing the budgeting, right? Getting feedback on your application. So all of this it's a learning opportunity as well, that can prepare you later for applying for much bigger grants or much more complex projects.
Yeah. And I'll just come back to the message in a minute that's on the forum. But for fairness, we do it's not myself and Daniel that make the decision at all. What we do, we have members of the TEL committee, and people come from across the world. We've got a global spread of members on the TEL committee. Currently, I think it's about 50 members that we have across the world who regularly meet. And there will be an allocation to 2 independent reviewers to look at it. Both of the reviewers will give an independent opinion. So there is it's scored against explicit criteria. And if you go onto our website, you'll be able to see what criteria it's been scored against. There'll also be, so there'll be a score, but there'll also be the feedback. And then myself and Daniel will look at the reviewers' comments. And if we have any queries, or there is a lack of consensus between those reviewers, it will go out to a further reviewer. So, you know, that process is educational, as Daniel said. So you're able to get feedback on that process. So if you are not successful one year, you can apply for it another year. But also, as Daniel said, it is part of a learning experience of producing high quality grant applications.
John, I briefly wanted to comment on the example we have on the chat. So I'm just going to read it out for those of you who are not actually, don't have the chat open right now. It says, I used Zoom in teaching lectures using virtual learning stations method. The method was used for the first time in lectures of medical education. It needs using breakout rooms, so it needs a Zoom subscription. The method is published in November of 2021. It was applied on 1 module and 1 discipline. So based on what you wrote there, what I'm understanding is that you're looking to see how you can expand this project into including more areas or disciplines. Again, here we need to think a little bit about innovation value. So if this is something that you already created and is working, then the question would be, where is the innovation in that case? If you're going to say, okay, well, I applied this method to this field, and now let's say I applied this method to classroom lectures that I was giving in physiology, and now I want to apply this to learning in the hospital with real patients virtually, then that would definitely be an innovation, right? And then that would be very attractive as a grant. But if I'm going to say, okay, I did it in physiology, and now I'm going to do the same thing as in embryology, then basically we are just copying the same thing that we did before. And then that would probably not be such a good innovation value. So again, think about what you're doing needs to innovate or do something new that has not been done before. And that's where we consider, oh yes, this is an innovation. Because if it's just extending something you already did, then really there is very limited innovation value to that. And it would probably be better to look for other sources of funding that are not innovation based. That being said, there's a lot of room for innovations that can be done with simple technologies. For example, with Zoom and the smartphones from your students, there's tons of different projects you could create that would be highly innovative. So again, please don't give up. I think it's a great idea what you've done, and you have a method that works. Now see, how can we push this method forward to do something I have not done yet? And then that suddenly becomes an innovation. And again, this can be the source of another publication in the future, right? And you know, that's how you will develop evidence that eventually your method is an effective way of doing this.
And we know that technology enhanced learning is what you would regard as a complex intervention. A complex intervention is an intervention which has numerous components which interact to produce something which is a whole. So if we look at a technology and enhanced learning, teaching and learning intervention, you know, it's the learners, it's the context, it's the content, it's the instructional design, and it's the technology. So all of those are areas in which something which is existing can be modified. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a new technology. It might be a new instructional approach or a new content. Obviously, the more of those factors that are different and innovative and new, the greater the chance that there's going to be success in applying for the grant. But it needs to be justified why you consider it is innovative. And it can be anything any of those factors: the learner, the context, the content, the instructional design, and the technology.
And as you develop your grant proposals, if you have any questions or there's something that was not very clear, I mean, we're happy to answer your questions via email as well. So please feel free to reach out, and yeah, definitely we would love to continue having this conversation as we move forward. We're hoping to get several grants several applications this year, and that way we can really kind of select the grants that are true innovations and be able to fund those and into becoming something else. But again, it's a great opportunity also to learn how to apply for grants. I think for me that was one of the challenging things when I started doing research was all my grants got rejected, and because I didn't understand how to structure them properly. So again, applying for a grant and receiving feedback itself, just that is already a huge benefit from this kind of project. So I do encourage you, if you have junior researchers or people who have not done much research in the field of medical education or health professions education, then this is a great opportunity to learn a little bit about how to do that.
Yeah, and the comment here, so in all cases, we will receive feedback on our proposal, even if it was not successful. Yeah, that's what we've done before. And there are some suggestions on how it could be improved, because part of the feedback form, I mean, essentially it's done as an anonymous system, because I think that's the fairest. But it's so in the last round, there were some unsuccessful applicants, unfortunately, and the feedback comments from each of the reviewers was collated. I did that, and then it was sent back to the individual with the invitation to resubmit based on those areas.
Yeah, and just to build up on what John just mentioned, we only evaluate complete applications, right? So if the application is incomplete, it will not go to the reviewers. No. So you need to make sure that you have completed the application with all the sections required, and then it will go on to the reviewers. And yeah, we're very happy to share that feedback with you later. Because this can help you either to reapply to this grant or maybe to restructure your idea and apply for a different grant in the future. So it's always valuable.
Yeah. Basically, we want to spend the money. That's number one. That's why the grant was put into place. AMEE is a membership organization. It's for people who are members of AMEE, either institutional or individual, because you have to be a member. But we want to give it away, and it should be a recognition that of that hard work, and that hard work in developing it. We recognize, as I said, both myself and Daniel, we put in grants, and we're successful and unsuccessful. And it's great to have that that feedback. And not all times when individuals put in grants that we get any feedback. And we feel that that is really important, because both myself and Daniel are active educators, and it's a learning experience for all of us.
And this will probably be very valuable feedback. The feedback we give is not like, oh, this was terrible, just go away, do it again. No, it's actual feedback on how to improve it. So I think it will be valuable as an exercise. If you're planning to apply for another grant as well, then this could be something to practice that. John, we have a really good question from Charlotte. It says, when is the deadline for the grant application, and is the grant available to apply for each year?
Yeah. Right. It's going to be announced again in May of this year. I'm not exactly sure when. We've got the AMEE TEL Committee meet once a month, and we want to make sure that when we announce it on the AMEE website and in the AMEE newsletter, that there aren't any other competing grants from other committees. So that's the organisational aspect, and the AMEE central office will decide when the most appropriate time in May is. What we've done before is to have about a 6 to 8 week window for the submission of the application, and we've been able to turn it around, the feedback, within essentially 6 weeks, which I think is good, because everybody, is a volunteer as well, and we've got to allow people to do that. So we've launched it for the first time this year. When it was launched, I think it was November, and we had 3 applications. We actually have availability of 3 grants. Unfortunately, there was a unanimous decision that there were issues related to those 3 applications, and it'd be inappropriate to discuss the general themes because they link into what we've said before. It's about thinking it through. Is this a real innovation? Has it been thought through? All these other issues. And no innovation grant was issued then. So it was decided that we would relaunch it in May, and the plan would be that they would be announced, like most of the AMEE grants, once a year. So it would be available once a year. So what we intend to have are 3 awards of £1,000 each year, and I'm sure that AMEE recognise inflation and all those aspects, but at the moment it's £1,000, and that's what we would continue with. The timeline, about a length of time, your individuals who apply are expected to provide a timeline for. There's a structured application form, and if you go onto the, I think it's on. I'm not sure if it's on the current website. It's probably been taken down when we did that, but it talks about what the application form. There is a timeline. We would expect that it's completed within a year. Now, obviously, if there are difficulties, what can happen to any grant, but I think it has to be completed. It has to be implemented and evaluated within 1 year, with a view to presenting it, the report. All of the grants need to have a report sent to us about how the money was spent. And again, that's all the details about with the award. We have all the various paperwork with that. We certainly would encourage everybody to present it in a journal and at AMEE, at the AMEE conference, as a short communication or as a poster, depending on how it's thought to be appropriate. And as I say, we're going to be launching what's called the Show and Tell site soon, which is a way of sharing new ideas in technology. And that's probably likely to be launched in the next few months. That Daniel's the lead for that and may be able to give you an update.
Yeah, and there's no publication fees for that. It's you can share multiple formats. You can share it as text, or if you want to do a video, or if you want to even a podcast describing your intervention. All these formats are going to be acceptable for the show and tell site. So again, you can do it in different ways. Paying for conference fees was the grant. To be honest with you, I don't think the size of this grant would leave much left after paying for conference fees. So we would kind of expect you to use the money for the intervention itself, not for the dissemination. As John mentioned earlier, the grant money should not be used for publication purposes or for medical writing, or so we expect this fund to be used for the innovation itself, not for the dissemination aspect of it. That is up to the researcher.
Yeah, I mean, at this moment in time, there's still a range of journals, high quality journals, which have no article processing charge. There may be a charge for open access for those journals, and many institutions have systems for that, but also many institutions have systems where acceptance to journals where there's an article processing charge, they're willing to pay for that. So that's one of the main reasons why we didn't include that. And also, it can be incredibly expensive for an article processing charge. You know, we're talking of £1,000 at least. So it would just eat all that up. So it would be inappropriate. I think if somebody wanted to get expertise in something and maybe visit an expert to see something, and it could be reasonably justified, and there wasn't institutional support for various reasons, or there was evidence that, like in my own institution, we're expected to look, if possible, for alternative ways of funding, or shared funding, or in kind from somebody else, if we're going to be doing international visits. So I think if there's a persuasive argument, I mean, several years ago, I obtained a university teaching fellowship, and I was able to go over to America and be on campus for a couple of weeks, working with a world expert. And that was an invaluable experience and helped me to develop a particular area of interest and skill, which has led to numerous publications. That was money well worth, that was money well spent, because it's not just been implemented locally, but nationally and internationally. So I think, you know, if it can be justified in the development of a method or the use of a technology as part of it, but we would need to see something tangible that was not just designed, but was also implemented and evaluated. So it's not just the design we're interested in, it's the design, the implementation, and the subsequent evaluation, so that people can learn from that experience. Notice I've used the word evaluation and not research here. Evaluation is looking at the value of something. And although it can get mixed with research, this is not about stimulating research. It's stimulating the development and design and implementation of something new.
Yeah, I would suggest when you start itemizing on how you're going to use the funds, think, you know, is this use going to facilitate the innovation to happen? So is it going to enable the innovation? If the answer is yes, then I think it could be covered by the grant. But you need to show how the money is being used in things that will directly allow you to have this innovation, not publish it, not share it, but to create the innovation itself. And I think that's a pretty good guide for thinking of what kind of funding to how you can use the funding and the purpose of it. Great. Okay. Well, anyway, again, if questions come up, please email us and let us know. And we're very happy to communicate with you to kind of give you further information or more detail if you need it. We are looking forward to your great innovations. Remember, it doesn't have to be a gigantic project. It can be a simple pilot, right? That can lead to maybe just publishing something simple like a really good stuff or something like that. And then that's more than enough. So again, think about small things you can do to test a concept, to try something new. And that is what this grant is for. Okay, don't think so much about implementing something in your whole institution, but small things that I can do that is going to let me do something I could not do before with my learners using technology. And I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah. And there's an article if you want to read about it. I published it. I think it was last year. It's in Medical Teacher, and it's called "Don't Run Before You Can Walk." And it talks about the importance of doing pilot studies, feasibility studies before embarking upon larger scale research studies. And a pilot study is about the proof of concept. So it's about, you have an idea, a new idea. Has it got any mileage to work? That's what we're looking for. So as Daniel says, it's great for that little bit of money you need to do that. So for example, you might want to do something, but you need to do some transcription and you haven't got the time. There might be that you want to, you've got to develop a subscription for something, as people have highlighted, just for a short period of time. And you don't want to spend it in the long term, but you need it for the short term. Well, this is what the piloting is for. And even if you have got something, think about a feasibility study. A feasibility study is where you have a reasonably clear intervention, maybe what somebody has done before, but will it actually work in a different context and is scalable? And that's a really important issue, because part of usability is not just about an individual. It's about, what will it be like if you're going to implement it over a larger area, in a larger number of people. So it's a beginning to look at that. So it's about being creative. And I think one of the most important things is, discuss it with people, discuss it with colleagues. Many of you have national and international networks. Get together, discuss it with people. Try and use a wider level of expertise. Discuss it with people like learning technologists who may give you a different insight into how you could do it differently.
Yeah, it's all about small things that can have an impact. Like, for example, just a general idea. Like, let's say you say, okay, I want to teach physical examination as a flipped classroom, right? You say, okay, I need some videos about the physical exam technique that I can show my students before the class so that when they come in, they already know what to do. Then you can purchase a GoPro camera that you can put on your head or your chest, and you film yourself doing the physical exam, and then you can share this online with your students before the class. And there you go, that's a project, right? So the cost was not too big. Maybe the cost was a camera cost, maybe you have some costs related to working with somebody else or getting some support for this, right? Maybe hiring a standardized patient so you can do the recordings. And that would probably use your £1,000 and give you a lot of things that you can actually do. So these are small projects that allow you to do something differently, right? That is away from the traditional way, and this is enabled by a certain technology. And this is kind of what we're hoping to see.
Yeah. And there might be, if it's particularly clinical, something related to clinical, there may be costs related to, and you want to implement it, and you want to evaluate it, and you want to be running it. There may be costs which are consumables, which are absolutely essential.
Yep.
And it's surprising how they all add up. I recently put in a grant and we got it turned down because we didn't put any teaching costs, because staff were quite prepared to spend some time. So we were putting in a grant, a local grant, for half the amount that they expected, but it was all the consumables. Somebody had to pay for these consumables that we were doing. Staff were happy to spend the time doing it, including at a weekend for this particular work that we were running.
Okay, so John, I think we're kind of
Yes.
on the hour, so I think it is time to bring our session today to a close. Again, we would like to thank all of you for participating today and sharing your questions and ideas. We are looking forward to your grant applications, so make sure that you submit something, or if you know somebody who can take advantage of this opportunity, please do share with them the information. The recording of this webinar will be available online, so if you want to direct somebody towards those recordings, then that would be great as well. And again, as I said before, we're very open to your questions. Feel free to send us an email with any additional information that you may need.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us today. And John, thanks for your time and your introduction.
Thank you, Daniel. So we want to award it, and we look forward to it. What we can't do, and you probably realise, is that we can only give general advice. Because we're part of the award panel. It will be inappropriate that we give detailed comments on something. We can say whether it's something which is likely to be acceptable. There are areas which definitely aren't included, and it's highlighted. For example, certain aspects of where it's predominantly simulation, but then it's such a wide area what we mean by simulation. I mean, I think it all depends on what it is. It's the same as informatics. Informatics include clinical decision support tools. If it fits into teaching and learning, that is great. And I think it's just about going for it. We want to support this work, and we want to give the money away, honestly. So we look forward to reaching it, seeing everybody, and best of luck. So hopefully we'll see you at Lyon. Bye then.
Stay safe, everybody. Bye.